Thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
Welcome to the latest edition of the Daily Memphis Tigers podcast. I'm the basketball beat writer, Stephen Johnson, joined by my guy, Frank Bonner, the football beat writer. There was a long weekend for Tigers football. Before we jump into that, don't forget to check out some of our other podcasts. Jennifer Biggs hosts Sound Bites, Eric Barnes hosts The Sidebar, and our guys Chris Harrington and Drew Hill record the Grizzlies podcast every week. You can find all of these and the Tigers podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and of course, thedailymemphian.com. So, Frank, I thought we'd be coming in here with discussing Memphis at 4-1 with another chance to maybe move to 5-1 and kind of stay at the top of the conference. But once again, the Tigers built a big lead. And once again, it seems like mistakes caused their lead to evaporate. So, Frank, what happened against Temple and where does Memphis stand right now with 2 straight losses?
It's the turnovers. That's been their Achilles heel these last 2 weeks. 4 fumbles in 2 games. Colin Watkins basically right there at the goal line to take 7 points off the board. They just got to protect the ball. And, to answer your second question, where are they at these last 2 weeks? I know Silverfield said that he isn't panicking right now, but going into this Tulsa game, I think they've got to be in desperation mode. I mean, you can't lose 3 straight.
Yeah, so it's interesting. And they go into this Tulsa game, and surprisingly, as of yesterday, I know they were like a 3.5, 4.5 point underdog. And Tulsa has not looked good at all this season. I think they may have played some team tough earlier in the year, but other than that, this has not been one of the best Tulsa teams. As they had that magical season last year. So for me to see that they were underdogs, either the bookies or Vegas, they're completely down on the Tigers. I think that might be a little over exaggeration, but how important is a win for the Tigers going to be this week?
I think it's important, but to get to your first point on the 3.5 point favorite, I think a lot of people are looking at that Oklahoma State game. Mm-hmm. They played Oklahoma State really tough, and they're the number 12 team in the country. And then they played Ohio State pretty tough for about 3 quarters. And so I think that's given people poise to say that Tulsa can beat Memphis in this game despite a 1-4 lead, 1-4 record. And then what was the first question again?
I said, how important is it going to be for them to get a dub this week?
Oh, I think it's real important because if you remember the conversation we were having after the Mississippi State game a couple weeks ago, and people were wondering how far could this team go, and then 2 weeks later they're looking at a 2-game skid, and so I think this is extremely important for the rest of the season because if you lose this game, then this season could kind of spiral. And so you need this game to kind of get you back on the right track. And the same could be said for Tulsa, in that fan base trying to get back on the right track. So I think this is kind of like a fork in the road for both of these teams going into this Saturday.
So the fumbles, is it just execution, just being sloppy? Do you think it's like a big problem, or are these issues correctable?
I always think that if your issue is fumbling, I think holding on to the ball can always be correctable. Mm-hmm. And I know for Brandon Thomas, the first fumble was Brandon Thomas's, and that was a pretty good strip. I mean, that was a good defensive play to force that fumble. But that Colin Watkins fumble, you just can't have that one. And so I don't see him making that mistake again. Mm-hmm. And so I think that can be corrected.
What's going on with the defense? I briefly was watching the game just because, like with Texas San Antonio last week, I saw Temple made the comeback. I guess I'm so used to Memphis being Memphis that they'll, even if the game is close, they'll pull it out at the end. But I watched, and they basically won the game on the jet sweep, going 60 yards for a touchdown. How disappointing was that? I think how disappointing was the finish in your mind, especially for the defense, to kind of basically end the game on a big play like that?
Yeah, it's very disappointing. And I asked, a couple of players after the game about the fourth downs. 2 of Temple's touchdowns were fourth down conversions. And then they had another fourth down conversion to kind of set up a touchdown on one of those drives. And you know, I think it was Jacoby said it's deflating to be able to have those stops on third down and then not get the job done on fourth. And part of the issue is, especially, you know, plays like that at the end of the game. Coach Mike McIntyre said a stat earlier today that no team in the country defensively has been on the field more than them. And so I think by the time you get down to the fourth quarter, part of it is that defense is tired. I mean, we saw it against UTSA. They were outscored 17-0 in the fourth quarter. And so I think part of it is these guys are just gassed by the end of the game, which is when you see those those big plays happen that shouldn't happen.
Yeah, man, I was just watching it, and it was just so easy the way that the play just developed. It was like everybody went to the exact opposite way, and then it did look like the guys were kind of tired trying to chase them down. And with the defense, it seems like there are these great individual performances: Quindale Johnson, J.J. Russell. I'm not sure how well Greg Rubin played, but he's been, you know, one of the top leaders in deflections. Mm-hmm. So it seems like they have individuals playing really well, but why do you think the whole unit hasn't flourished just yet?
I think they just can't finish the play, especially in the pass rush, right? I know the pass rush has been, you know, part of the issue for a lot of fans and everything. And sometimes they do get in the backfield, but they don't get the quarterback down, right? And so they're in the position, but in the key moments, sometimes they just don't make the right play, even if they're right there. And so it's like they do 80% of everything right, but that last 20%, sometimes they just can't get it done. And, you know, sometimes that's the difference between winning and losing.
How did the offense look against them?
Better than UTSA. I will say that they looked better, but they still didn't look like the team that they were in those first couple of games to start the season. But I mean, if you take away those fumbles, the offense doesn't look as bad, right? They mitigated the 3 and outs, but they still had some drives that didn't sustain long. It might have had like a 5-play drive here and there, but they only had 1 3 and out. And so they did look better. But when you've got the running back group that they have, you've got Sean Dykes and Calvin Austin playing, you know, the way that they're playing this year, you expect that offense to look better than what they did against Temple.
Mm-hmm. So what type of challenge? I know Tulsa was, you know, a dominant defense a year ago, had one of the best linebackers season. I think Zay Cullins, that was one of the best I've ever seen a linebacker just play, pick sixes and all that. Obviously, he's gone now. So what is Tulsa in 2021, and how can the Tigers bounce back with a W against those guys?
Well, I think for one, Shamari Brooks is somebody who people didn't see last year with that season-ending injury. Mm-hmm. Before last season, like, he was their guy. He was their running back, and so you're going to see, you know, Shamari Brooks, and I think, you know, you gotta limit him. Keelan Stokes, he was their top receiver last year, and so you got to keep an eye on him. And then, you know, Brandon, in terms of passing yards, top 20 in the country. And so, you know, that doesn't look good for, you know, that Memphis defense. But honestly, it's simple. It's really simple. Protect the football, you win the game.
So is that your prediction for the game, Frank, or is that basically just the key? Like, if they don't turn the ball over, they should win?
Yeah, I mean, that's my prediction for the game. My prediction for the game is that they'll protect the football and they'll win the game. I do think that this game can turn on a dime on one turnover. And so if you're Memphis, you hope you're on the right side of that. And I think after fumbling these last 2 games, I'd be real surprised if they come into this third game and fumble like that again. So I do think they'll protect the football and they'll come out with a win.
Yeah, hopefully so, man, because like you said, the season can really turn quickly because, you know, if you lose that game, you got Navy, even though you got Navy at home, triple option on Thursday, then you go at UCF. So, you know, I think this is definitely a must win. Like you kind of said earlier, it's going to be a fork in the road. But so we'll see what they end up doing. It is going to be a primetime game for Tulsa, so it could be. I mean, you might know a little bit more, but how's the road environment at Tulsa?
I think for this one, you know, because I mean, it's the same thing on the Memphis side. Fans get up for for Tulsa because of what happened in 2019. I think Tulsa fans are going to get up for this one. I think from a crowd perspective, this may be their biggest crowd of the season for Tulsa, just because of what happened in 2019 and how that game played out. And so I could see Tulsa fans making this one of their biggest games of the year.
All right, well, it'll be interesting. We'll see how the Tigers handle another big road game. So on the basketball front, we're still a week away from Memphis Madness, which is kind of, I guess you could say, really the signal of the season. But today there's big news. The Tigers are having another pro day. They had one back in 2019 when they had James Wiseman, the number 1 recruiting class. So I've heard they're expecting maybe at least 100 NBA scouts. Now they see Imani Bates, Jalen Duren. I mean, so I think it's a lot of big news going on as we're still in the preseason. I'm really excited to see which players will really stand out and which players can really maybe kind of just help their stock and end up on those NBA radars before we start the season.
Yeah, think about pro days before the season. I'm kind of on the fence about having a pro day before the season starts. I mean, what are your, in terms of focus perspective, what are your thoughts on having a pro day this close to the start of the season as opposed to just having it at the end of the year?
Well, I think for me, if this was football, I would definitely agree with you. But I think with Penny, it's more of maybe in terms of like a marketing type of standpoint, just having, and it's also a great recruiting pitch. You know, they're having official visitors all week, all next week. They're going to visit kids. So if you have this pro day right here, and you do have 100 NBA scouts, and Penny can go into any living room in the country and say, hey man, we had 100 scouts show up basically for a practice. So just imagine the type of attention you'll get from actual games and whatnot. So I don't think in terms of focus, it'll really have a big impact just because there is still Memphis Madness. There are still exhibition games. So they'll have time to recalibrate and kind of get back in that season mode. But I think it's great exposure for the program though.
And then I know, the infraction about the James Wiseman and everything, and that's some information about that may be coming out soon. How much do you think that may take away from the focus of the start of the season? Not necessarily the players, but just the excitement around the program.
Well, what I'm hearing is going to kind of come out on Monday is basically an update on the timeline of the investigation. So what we could get is basically the NCAA said at the end of April, all these cases, there are 6 cases being handled by the IARP. They said they wanted all 6 of those cases wrapped up within a month in April. So we're in month 6 right now. So I'm assuming, like I said, this is speculation that maybe the update will be, hey, Memphis will receive its ruling no later than January so-and-so, February so-and-so, because they're coming up on that timeline very quickly. And I don't know if that announcement will really damper the start of the season, but I think for some fans, if it does come out, hey, we're going to rule on this in March, some fans are going to kind of have in the back of their mind, no matter what happens, is the NCAA going to come down and wipe our season out? Or are they going to come down late and say, hey, you guys are banned from the postseason or anything like that? And like I said, this is just my opinion. I don't think Memphis will receive as harsh penalties as, say, a Louisville and some of these other programs that are dealing with level 1 and level 2 accusations. But it'll be interesting to see how this board handles, because Memphis was really defiant in what they did, which is typical Memphis fashion. And I know the fans really enjoyed it at the time. So we'll see if that ends up backfiring. Maybe the penalty is a little bit harsher than maybe it should be, because like I said, James Wiseman was suspended. And of course he ended up leaving the team. So you would think in a sense that could be enough, but there might be scholarship reductions or something like that. You never know with the NCAA. So it'll be interesting, but basically we will get an update on the timeline, and hopefully we'll have a clearer picture of when this investigation is going to be done and when this saga is going to be finally over.
Now, from just make sure I'm right, this would be the first that they would hear about any rulings, right? So this isn't even an appeals process or anything like that.
No,
right?
There are no appeals with this one. So once the decision comes down, that's final.
That's it.
And Memphis was the first case to be used by this new the NCAA created this in 2020, I think, for what's supposed to be complex cases, but in typical NCAA fashion, it's been slower than I think they anticipated. I don't know how effective it's been, so we'll find out. But so yeah, we should finally get some concrete information on when this investigation should be over with. But you never know with the NCAA.
Now, to go back to a lighter note, I want to circle back to the pro day. Obviously, we know who the headline names for the pro day is. What player do you expect to maybe turn a little bit of heads that isn't necessarily at the top of the list?
I think it's going to be Josh Minot. He's another freshman. He was a guy that, in a regular recruiting class in a regular year, a guy that's top 50 and that was basically a All-American in high school would definitely be the gem of your recruiting class. But when you bring in Larry Brown, Rasheed Wallace, Imani Bates, Jalen, some of those other guys, and even the Lawson twins, who are, of course, a big story around Memphis, it can kind of be easy for a player to kind of just go under the radar. So I think for a lot of scouts, he may not have necessarily been on their boards just yet, but I think when they get in there and they see how tall he is, how fluid he is, he might be able to kind of show off that skill set, because he told me in April when he was down here, April or May, when he was down here for the Option Classic, he views himself as like a big guard. Like he's 6'9", 6'10", so he's one of those new generation of point forwards, and I think that's really when he's going to be at his best. But so I think he's going to be the guy that could really stand out just from his size and skill point. And I also think Jonathan Lawson, another guy 6'6", 6'7", so eventually play point guard for the Tigers most likely, is another guy that could potentially fascinate scouts.
Now, these guys aren't necessarily on the top of the list right now, but where do you feel like they can put themselves by the end of this year?
Well, I think figuring out the rotation for the Tigers is going to be so fascinating, because they have so many options that you can make the case they're arguably the deepest team in college basketball, just because you're bringing guys like Alex Lomax, Malcolm Dandridge, probably Chandler Lawson, maybe even a guy like Landers Nolley off the bench, and those guys have all started or played heavy minutes, whether it be at Memphis or Oregon, Virginia Tech for Landers and Chandler. So for these younger guys like Josh Minot and Jonathan Lawson, I'm not sure how far they can jump up on those NBA boards, but they could. I think the biggest thing for them is just flashing their talent whenever they have the opportunity, so they can kind of be on those boards for next year and the years after that. But I think both are going to be players that end up playing some. How big their role is going to kind of be determined by how much they can push those veterans. But I think Penny Hardaway and Shad will find a way to make sure that those two at least play some minutes, whether it be garbage time or maybe they end up with a bigger role in the rotation by the end of the season.
Well, the season will be here before you know it. And this weekend, Memphis fans, or the Memphis team, is hoping that fans don't jump off the bandwagon too early yet. They got a big game this Saturday, so we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, man.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.